Number 1, Maniacal, Manipulative, Psychotic by Lindsay Flo. The storm had felt like a rumor all day, but now, the sky was delivering. For a second, like a knife catching a glint of light and refracting it in multitude. Everything gleamed white. The lightning split the whole sky in half, and in that moment, it was brighter than daylight. The tops of the gravestones seemed to pulse like strobe lights in a nightclub before blackness settled them down again. She was kneeling in front of her sister's grave. She came here often after all. That's what a mourning sister did, but she felt better coming at night. Shrouded in darkness, she could be herself, and she could feel what she wanted to, which, sometimes, was nothing. A cavernous, echoey space of emptiness. Perhaps there was a bit of pride, if she were being honest, along with a genuine sense of connection, even though her sister was nothing more than a skeleton 6 feet under. Funny how it took death to rekindle a connection that hadn't existed since the womb. Either way, the emotions weren't appropriate for daytime mourning. The lightning seemed suitable for tonight. It was the anniversary of her sister's death, and it lit something up inside of her too, a dark part of her that she didn't always feel comfortable touching. In the dynamic moment when everything became bright, she leaned forward and put her lips on the cold stone. She was certain that whatever plane of existence her sister lived on in, her head was exploding at this artificial expression of tenderness. It wasn't totally artificial. It really wasn't. It was just that, in life, they were polar opposites. Good and bad. Angel and devil. Black and white. They were identical, but no one would ever mistake one for the other. And yet, the thought that had hung out in her mind for the past year said otherwise. They were not so different. Their mother, Paige, would have told you there was something wrong with Madeline right from the start. Her daughters were identical twins, but the resemblance was purely physical. Madeline had been a difficult baby from day one. She was one who cried nonstop, who refused to nurse. When Paige would finally get her settled and carefully place her down, she rarely got as far as the nursery door before Madeline's blood-curdling cries began again, often waking Erica as well. Paige would want to sob on the floor. She was so absolutely depleted. Madeline was an infant who made Paige understand why shaken baby syndrome was a thing. As a toddler, Paige would tell you that Madeline fine-tuned her mean streak. Paige could not take her eyes off her for even a second, for fear she would push Erica down the stairs, or pinch her so hard a purple welt would instantly appear. Erica, by contrast, was sweet as pie, and Paige thanked God every day for that. She didn't think she could have handled 2 demon babies, which is how she thought of Madeline. At night, she begged God to forgive her. What kind of mother hated her child? Oh, she loved them both. But she detested Madeline. She wished for her mother or sister to offer to take Madeline for a weekend even a day, but that never happened. Erica, though, she was quiet, yet and slept well, and was a child who lit up with a smile when you spoke to her, unlike her sister, who was more liable to kick you in the shin, the demon grin on her face. Erica grew into a little girl teachers raved about, one who followed the rules and was polite. Paige knew you were not supposed to have favorites, but she didn't see how that was possible. When she asked God to forgive her, she also prayed that Madeline would outgrow her wickedness. That never happened either. Erica would have told you that being the good child was a heavier burden than it appeared. Aside from never wanting to cause a fuss, and even good little girls became frustrated or angry sometimes, there was also Madeline's temper to consider. Erica learned at a young age to watch her back. Madeline had a fondness for pushing her down the stairs or sticking her foot out to trip her. Erica spent a lifetime sleeping with one eye open. Years of watching her back, of being ready to defend herself against her sister's attacks, was exhausting. Sometimes, she wanted to be the one who screamed out a tirade, who wiped the contents of a table off as she ran by in an indignant rage. But she didn't think her mother could have handled that. There was a weariness in Paige's eyes so solid you knew it bled right down into her soul. As they grew up, Madeline's attacks against Hartwin became more devious in nature. Bored, it seemed, of physical assault, Madeline would do things that seemed more benign. But these acts of scheming cut Erica deeper than any bruise or twisted finger could. Ripping up a book report with a big, red 100% at the top. Dumping black dye on her cheerleading uniform. Erica learned quickly that it was easier to keep her head down and privately tell their mother that she had aced the math testament. It was easier just to not run for student council president, to give up cheerleading. Erica locked her bedroom door at night. The truth was, Madeline terrified her. And Madeline would have told you her parents played favorites from the start. So why not star in the role she was cast? She would have entertained you with memories of being 4 and staring at her perfect, pristine sister while hatred she could not stop bubbled inside of her. Erica's hair looked like wrinkles on a child model, and Madeline's was a wild frizz that could never be tamed. Just like her, she supposed. She would tell you a story about grabbing a hunk of Erica's shiny blonde curls and hacking them off with contraband sewing scissors before she even knew what had happened. She would tell you 100 stories like that. But the truth was, it got old. Erica never reacted to physical attacks, just hid her quiet, pathetic face in her hands. Madeline had to become more creative. She would tell you about how she slept with Erica's high school boyfriend and made a video of it. That was fun. How she posted it online and watched it go viral in a matter of hours. How she had kept her face out of the video, so no one knew it was her. Everyone assumed it was Erica. But Erica knew. Erica knew because she was a virgin. Madeline knew this secret of hers because she had read Erica's pathetic little diary, the one with a pink patent leather cover and a lock that looked like it belonged to a 12-year-old. Madeline would tell you the best part was that Erica's boyfriend had no clue he was hooking up with the wrong twin. His eyeballs practically bulged out of his head. He was so excited when Madeline locked Erica's bedroom door and promptly took off her shirt. Madeline had chuckled after he left, and she watched the video, excited to see how this would play out. As she expected, Erica's good girl reputation took a hit and she broke up with her boyfriend. Good. Served her right. Madeline would tell you about how her hatred for Erica ran so deep she was unsure of who she was without it. Their father, Andy, wouldn't tell you anything because he had split years ago. It was no secret that his reasons for departure were hinged on the behavior of his maniacal, manipulative, psychotic daughter. Both girls had heard him scream this phrase at their mother, who was refusing to get Madeline help. Scream it as if instead of Madeline her name was maniacal, manipulative, psychopathic daughter. They were only 5 years old at the time. Paige felt that Madeline was much too young to be subjected to testing, therapy, or medication. Andy felt the complete opposite, and so their marriage, which had once been a true love affair, although neither girl knew that dissolved. Lightning spliced through the night again, and she traced the lettering on her sister's grave. She was glad she was dead. Oh, she would never say that, even though people probably expected her to. Even though her mother side-eyed her through silent dinners, the gaze of a woman mourning tinted with fear. She was pretty sure her mother knew that the accident hadn't been an accident. Paige would never say anything though. Their mother had been through hell and back. Losing her husband. A lifetime of a maniacal, manipulative, psychotic daughter. Losing a child which, no matter what the circumstances, was devastating. Paige was withered up, spent. Her movements were ghost-like, as if she had died alongside her daughter. It hadn't been murder or anything like that. There was nothing premeditated in that sense. It really was an accident. But it felt as if the universe had offered up an opportunity. Like a giant hand had reached down from the sky and said, "Here. Take her out. End all your problems." It was a beautiful October day. They had driven home from school and Stoney's silenced fallout of Erica's boyfriend's betrayal was still a fresh wound. She had parked the car and was gathering her things, and then realized she needed to move it to the street. Their mother wasn't home yet, and she would need access to the garage. She threw it into reverse and immediately felt a dull thud, a heavy tap. Instinctively, she slammed on the brakes. And then, she let them up. She let the car roll backwards, feeling the satisfying rocking as it ran right over her sister and accomplished what she dreamt of so many times. It was shocking, both what had happened and the sense of peace that she felt about it. Of course, the aftermath wasn't pretty, particularly the immediate aftermath. She had always felt that she had a strong stomach, but seeing the remains of Hartwind's face identical to hers in smithereens on the driveway was enough to make her vomit before she even dialed 911. Paige's primal scream when she showed up moments later. Ambulances already surrounding the house. Okay, she did feel bad about that. Whatever you could say about Paige hating Madeline, she couldn't help but feel empathy for her own mother. Then there had been the funeral. The abysmally low number of people in attendance, it wasn't hard to figure out why. What would they say? Sorry for your loss. The awkward and uncomfortable appearance of her father, who patted her shoulder like she was a horse in a stable, a horse he was a little bit wary of. He barely spoke to her, only stared at the casket. She swore she saw tears dripping. Before he left all those years ago, their father had made it no secret that Erica was his favorite. Paige, at that time, was still trying to perpetuate the notion that she loved her daughters equally, but Andy had little patience for that. Erica was the one he played with, the one he took along for Sunday errands, the one whose ears he pulled quarters from in an embarrassing dad joke way. Still, it was bizarre to see him standing over the casket, crying. It wasn't even open. She had half expected him to stick around. Maybe with her sister out of the way, the three of them could form a nice, normal family. She was nearly 18, but she still fantasized about the life she could have had if it hadn't been so streaked with all the hatred. A mom and a dad who loved each other and adored her, and that was it. No sister. She could picture her whole future Christmas dinners with the three of them together. Her wedding day, with both parents walking her down the aisle together. A happy life. But that was not to be. Andy split faster than he had the first time. He hadn't even come to the interment at the cemetery. Rain was beginning to fall now, and she thought it was time to go home. She really didn't want to, because the biggest secret that she kept was that she'd felt closer to her sister in the year that had passed since she'd run her over than she had all her life. She felt a sense of falliveness, connection whenever she visited the grave. Sometimes, she was almost a bit regretful. Maybe that connection meant that some way, somehow, they could have overcome their differences. Maybe her sister had just been playing the role she was casting, after all. Or maybe it meant they were not so different after all. As the rain began to fall harder, Erica traced her fingers through Madeline's name. It was a ritual she did each time she said goodbye. She traced the name, she whispered it into the darkness, and she leaned over and kissed the chilled, wet stone once more before standing up. It was funny. If it had been the other way around, if Madeline had crushed Erica with her car, everyone would have assumed it was on purpose. But Erica? No one would ever suspect that she'd had a moment to think. A moment when she could have stopped the trajectory of what was about to happen. And if they did suspect that moment existed, they would never guess that Erica would have taken her foot off the brake purposefully, intently. Not Erica, who volunteered at the homeless shelter and dutifully rinsed her toothpaste down the sink and never had a bad word to say about anyone, even her maniacal, manipulative, psychotic sister. No one would ever know. And there was a sense of peace now. At least she didn't have to watch her back all the time, always wondering what Madeline was up to. The space gave Erica time to think about things. The amount of energy that had been spent managing, deflecting, and watching out for Madeline's hatred was mind-boggling. Without her there was a lot of space. Maybe that was why she liked the way she felt when she visited the cemetery. It was familiar. Erica leaned over and kissed the gravestone one last time. She felt that jolt of electricity coursing through her, that piece of evil that seemed to come from Madeline. She had always understood Madeline's hatred because she felt the same way. She had just never done anything about it. At least until the day of the accident. No, they were not so different, were they? As Erica turned to leave, another bolt of lightning bent the sky white and purple. Just at that moment, she swore she saw a hand reach out of the ground, grab her ankle and yank her. When the darkness enveloped her again, she saw she had only tripped over her own 2 feet. There was nothing there. No hand sticking out of the ground, no ruptured earth. Still, Erica was shaken. She scurried out of the cemetery, her heart pounding in a way it hadn't in a whole year. The entire time, she continued to look over her shoulder, expecting to see Madeline. She swore she heard her chortling behind her, but as she reached her car, she realized it was only the thunder. She thought about the day recently, when she'd tripped heading down the front steps of the house, how she'd sworn she felt a hand shove her from behind. There was no one there though, and she had chalked it up to needing her morning coffee more than she realized. Now though, Erica wondered, wouldn't that be just like the maniacal, manipulative, psychotic Madeline to be able to cause trouble from beyond the grave? She quickly shook her head, as if to clear that thought away. This was just PTSD from years of abuse, leftover trauma from what she'd done. It was not Madeline. As she threw the car in reverse to turn around and hightail out of the cemetery, she remembered that day in all of its vividness, and she knew she'd done the right thing. There was only so much Madeline could do anymore. Being dead and all. Erica was glad she was dead. She was glad she was the one who made it happen. Madeline wasn't the only one who was maniacal, manipulative, psychotic. Number 2, Adelaide's Cemetery by Lucy Joyce. Death was accompanied by the patter of nurses' rubber-soled shoes marching briskly along linoleum floors. The smell of antiseptic solution, a gurney wheel, in need of oil, squeaking rhythmically as another patient was rushed past, starchy white sheets, and the sharp and angular shapes of nurses' headdresses. My body revolted against the crisp order in violent expulsions of browns, greens, and yellows against the bleached hospital whites. Veins stood out on my small, pale neck and spittle flew from my mouth as I screamed. The cool bed sheets, tucked with neat and stern hospital corners, were twisted into angry, damp knots against my writhing body. I am ordinarily a neat and demure person, so you can imagine my cringing in horror at this loud, violent, and messy departure. I shudder when my mind, invariably, drifts to remember it. I am happily brought back to the present by the distant iron clawing of the cemetery gate. There's a reassuring and settled sameness about death. A contentment, cool, massy, and stone-strewn, calm and painless. Life was hard or stressful. My father worked long days in crumbling mining tunnels cut deep into the earth. He would return with his face etched deeply with coal dust, collapsing into wheezy snores on the small, hard bed. I remember, too, my mother's mouth, tight-lipped with constant worry, and concealing two chipped front teeth. I remember my baby brother screaming with hunger and cold. The frigid earth was chipped open by large shouldered men with axes and spades when that brother died before the spring melt. Of course, there were some joyous moments, things I recollect with nostalgia. There is one thing I remember with a thrill of excitement: Alice Aldridge and I on that summer morning. The air was already thick, humid, and buzzing with crickets as we ran to the creek. It was our favorite place in summer, this particular spot, where water gathered cool and shaded in a gurgling pool of deep stone. That day, for the first time, we swam naked. Our girlish squeals were loud. We were exhilarated with the naughtiness of it, with the thrilling and mortifying possibility that someone might appear suddenly and see us. When we got out to dress on the warm rocks, I turned to watch as she emerged, serpentine and lithe, from the water. Beautiful, was the thought that arrived unbidden but suddenly completely obvious into my mind. We were no longer squealing or giggling. Droplets slid over her small, round breasts. Her nipples were nut brown, and bunched tightly and sharply from the cold water. For a terrifying and intoxicating moment, I imagined licking off the sliding droplets which rolled over her honey-colored skin. She watched me watching her. Her wet, dark eyelashes framed bold and knowing green eyes, like a bewitching goddess. It's difficult, now, to ascertain to what extent Alice Aldridge knew about my sudden and sincere desire to lick her beautiful young breasts, because we both contracted cholera in the following days. She lived, but I died. I waited, aching, but Alice didn't arrive at Highgate Cemetery for another 60 years. As with all of the others, a pile of earth was disgorged for her, in dark and damp clods, worms struggling wetly in the too bright air. Her body was wrinkled and thin, but those sultry green eyes had never dimmed. She had married a man liar, I thought, and had 5 children. I spent those first decades in hope, but she did not remain after death in a ghostly form, as I remained alone. Sometimes I traced the name I had in life, Adelaide Quayle, 1898 to 1913, with a finger as translucent and light as a whisper. This simple summary of myself is etched in modest stone, now coated with moss. These days, my existence is mainly devoted to observing the predictable contours of the seasons. I sit for weeks on the shoulder of a stone angel to watch the snow gradually recede from sun-filled valleys. I observe the daisies, irrepressible, forcing their way through the frigid ground to greet the spring sun. I lie across the cracked stone of my own grave and watch as raindrops hurtle towards the ground from tempestuous, autumnal skies. I am contained here, by unknowable forces, to the cemetery and the surrounding forest. I have little influence on the world around me, except maybe a slight parting of the wind as it moves around me. I am impervious to dirt and mud, invisible even after bathing in stagnant September moose swamps, or lying across summer-baked dirt roads. On swirling, freezing winter mornings, my bare feet leave barely perceptible prints as I wander across the lightest drifts. I am unnoticed by all but the lightest and most alert insects and birds, which I can occasionally convince to briefly perch on my insubstantial form. I spend some of my time, in the warmer months, accompanying tour groups of motley children on school excursions. Modern people tend to burn their bodies, a morbid practice in my opinion, but it has had the positive effect of converting Highgate Hill Cemetery into more of a commemorative museum than an active cemetery. This is a relief to me. Although I am without a body, I am not without feelings, and I used to find the wailing of grieving widows and the cries of children at the graves of recently dead loved ones very distressing. I would stand with them as they cried, wearing an invisible expression of sober and respectful grief. Now, instead, I join the children as they crowd around information boards about local history, or in front of graves and mausoleums. On one information board, entitled Coal Creek Settlement 1890 to 1957, there's a photo of some children from my schoolhouse, taken 2 years before I started there myself. They see us, but they don't really see us, these children of the present day. I've watched, mere inches from their faces, as they observe my contemporaries. I can sense that understanding is lost somewhere in the colorlessness of the black and white image, or in our straight faces. Smiling wasn't in vogue in photographs at the time, or just by virtue of the clothing which seemed strange and old-fashioned to them. We're not so different, you know, I explain, although they don't hear me. The tour guide does nothing to help. My grave, for example, is used to describe the cholera epidemic which gripped the valley in the early 20th century. It was allegedly caused by the town's water supply running through the corpses of men crushed in a mining disaster, not a fact that I reveled in finding out about. Well, there's more to know about me than that, I say, irritably. But this woman was born in 1981, so I can't blame her for knowing very little about history. There is a fir tree near my grave which outdates this alleged expert of the past by 2 decades. She tells the children about my tragic death, at only 15 years of age. This death of mine, she points out, was 1 year before the outbreak of the Great War. This provides a convenient segue to shepherd the trotting children to the next stand of graves. Some days I find it insulting that my death is used as merely a pivoting point towards more important and famous deaths. But perhaps I'm being overly sensitive. The children, by this point, are usually glazed. This isn't surprising. How can children root themselves in the shifting sands of the past with facts and figures? 60 men dead in a mine collapse in 1913 at Coal Creek. 20 million dead in the First World War. Better to tell them that Bert Lawrence, visible in the front row of the schoolhouse photo, has a visibly wet nose because he cried on the first day of school. Or that the frizzy-haired Maggie Aldridge Middlewright, sister of the aforementioned Alice, was in love with Thomas Woodburnback Wright. Or that we would all have snowball fights outside of the schoolhouse when school finished on the last day before our Christmas break. If only I could tell them, I think, with wicked glee, about Alice's wet breasts glistening, smiling at me with sultry confidence. Then they would understand, I think, that the young people in the faded photograph were not so different from themselves. On a cool autumn morning, one girl, from among another group of shuffling and sniffing school children, looked at my grave and said, to no one in particular, Adelaide Quayle. Adelaide, like the city in Australia, and Quayle, like the bird. Her alert green eyes regarded my name with interest. I felt seen, recognized, celebrated. Yes, I cried, unheard. Exactly. That's me. I followed the green-eyed girl, endeavoring to be helpful by giving unheard but correct answers to the questions on the worksheet secured in her clipboard. I reluctantly farewelled her when her group left through the wrought iron gates 45 minutes later. I obsessed over the minutiae of this meeting for glorious and delightful hours afterwards. Imagine my shock and joy when the girl, my new Alice, walked through again only a week later, wrangling an exuberant, golden puppy on a leash. I walked with them from one gate to the next, telling her about the changing of the seasons, about the hospital with its clean, white surfaces, about my family, and about the schoolhouse. I told her that we could run together through the long grass once the weather warmed again. We could run to the creek. I could show her the cool, sheltered spot where the water is deep. The air would be hot, and we could drape our dresses on the warm rocks while we swam together. The first sprinkling of snow dusted the tops of the immense, distant ranges, an event I usually watch for, but I was too distracted to notice. Being unseen and unheard had previously only been a mild annoyance, but now it was torturous. Alice arrived most days in the evenings, dog on leash, traveling from gate to gate, presumably as part of a larger loop. I screamed in agonized frustration each day as she left me, yearning to be seen, to be known, to touch and be touched. Inspiration came one morning when I observed a dew-covered spider web, branching and complex, ordinarily invisible, but illuminated by its wetness in the bright morning sun. Nearby, a hummingbird was extracting nectar from a group of flowers. I hardened my heart and reached for the small bird, unsure what force my invisible fingers could produce. I was as shocked as the hummingbird when I was able to grasp its tiny, almost weightless body. I twisted its neck decisively, raised it to my lips. My invisible and blunt but persistent teeth tore at the sinewy body. Feathers twisted and fluttered to the damp earth as warm, small organs burst against my lips. Blood and entrails ran down my chin, coating my mouth and face. The wait for her was tortuous. I distractedly observed yellowed leaves fluttering to the ground from the oak trees on the hill. Finally, the light started to ebb from the afternoon, turning the sky into a dusty gray. I heard her approaching and stood at the gate's entrance, willing my nervous mouth the contours of which I hoped were now, at last, visible into a smile of greeting. At first I thought that my plan had failed. They were only a few steps away and continuing unconcernedly. Suddenly, though, the dog stopped, eyes fixed on my face, and uttered a low growl. The girl, confused and worried, stopped as well. She looked at the dog and followed its gaze to the space where I stood in front of them. My smile widened. I was exhilarated by my scheme, ready, for the first time in over a century, to be seen. My Alice stumbled backwards, her eyes wide and a scream beginning in her throat. There was a perfect moment, before she ran, where we looked right into each other's eyes. Number 3 Words by Fives by Dara Silman. I like to learn words by fives. Jerry, Perry, scary, betterment, elephant. On elephant. Look, look, I shouted in excitement. A elephant, a child of twilight, slowly plodded between bare trees across the road. Its tusks were not white as I saw in movies about animals, but more like unhealthy gray. One tusk's end was broken. Elephant's eyes didn't look bright. They were dull as the tires of cars that passed beneath my window. I looked back toward the bathroom. There were no familiar sounds. I climbed from the stool and walked to the washing machine. Some buttons were red. I knew the washing cycle was over. I tried to open the washing machine's door to insert new washing capsule, but it was locked. I had to wait 5 minutes for it to open. That was too much silence to bear. I stood still before the washing machine until all the lights were out and then pressed the on button. I watched as a t-shirt that had colored other clothes red started to spin again. Tasmanian devil on it scratched the washing machine's insides, its smile stretching and stretching, unable to follow its body. Finally, the t-shirt disappeared, replaced by a red bedsheet that once had been white. For a split second, I saw a tiny red leg of my hamster Jerry. It often escaped of its cave and hid in the basket for dirty clothes. Mom must have put it into the washing machine. I saw a video of a prank where boys put a cat into the washing machine and then took out what was left of the cat. It became red, and in some places, hair was torn out. Its eyes were red too. For the first time, I thought that maybe the clothes became red because of the hamster. It was so tiny, yet it had so much blood that it made all clothes red. I listened to the humming sound of the working washing machine. I saw the buttons flaring one after another in the usual manner. The outside of the screen looked dusty, and I followed its contours with my finger. My mom promised to wash it every weekend, but then the weekend came, and she was too tired to do anything. I saw Jerry's brown-black back stuck in the red t-shirt sleeve. I could return to the window to watch the elephant. Before I saw the elephant again, my face reflected at me from the window. There were 5 words with which my mom characterized me: too skinny, too wide-eyed, too freckled, too demanding, already 7-year-old. The elephant had disappeared. It must have gone down the hillside toward the river down below. Impenetrable darkness and its allies, shadows, filled the space where the elephant had once been. The melting snow lumps here and there, between dry last year's grass, resembled thrown-away diapers. The full, pale yellow moon appeared in the sky. I knew the moon didn't go anywhere during the day, we just couldn't see it because of the bright sun. I saw a piece of bright yellow strip stuck to one of the lower tree branches near the road. Depending on the wind, it entangled around the branch or limply hung from it. From my mom's telephone conversations, I knew a car had hit a pedestrian on the roadside 2 days before. If I squinted, I could see the yellow lights of lampposts becoming one shiny line, not isolated circles of color amidst the night. I thought there were so many hues of yellow: yellowson, yellow moon, yellow light, or yellow strip, but I couldn't explain the beauty of colors in such simple words as yellow. The difference between the elephant's gray and its trunk's gray was insurmountable. The dreadful gray of the last year's grass frightened me the most. The grass rustled underfoot, and a dead mouse could be under any hillock. There were so few words for so many hues of gray and yellow and red. The hit pedestrian was a bunch of blue harcoat and red, the hue of red as of the clothes in the washing machine. I didn't turn on the lights. Instead, I watched the world become dark gray. The road under the lamppost lights glistened after the recent rain. Soon, the light frost would turn the road into a skating rink. A skating rink. I can skate, I shouted and got afraid of how small my voice sounded. There were no calming sounds in the apartment. The clock had stopped working many months ago, and my mom always promised to repair it on the weekend. But when it came, she could do nothing. Long thoughts without end in my head were my friends in the darkness, where space and words became irrelevant. I could go to the window in my mother's room, which overlooked a neighboring building. I could have watched people watching TV in the distinctly recognizable TV blue light. Their faces would have looked waxed, and their dogs that barked at me would have lied sleeplessly near the armchairs. I could have imagined the heavy dangling of the pans being pulled out of a cupboard, and the aromas of frying potatoes and meatballs. I could have swallowed the saliva that still dripped onto the windowsill. No matter how hard I could have tried not to think about the pans and fries. I didn't turn on the lights. In the darkness, words became irrelevant and came to me hurriedly, hiding in my head from the advancing shadows. The elephant could have been born only in the twilight, not at night. I learned words by 5's daylight, twilight, night, mom's back, snack. I climbed from the stool and sneaked to the washing machine, sidestepping the dead black corners. I squeaked when a mixture of gray and white, with dark gray lines on its back, started to move toward the bathroom. I could have shouted or shrieked, but what was the point of screaming when nobody was around? The thought that no familiar sounds drowned out the silence made me cry out. The ball stopped and stood on its hind legs, sniffing the air. Then the ever-moving shadows sucked it in. For the first time, I thought that maybe I had two hamsters instead of one. Some buttons glowed red in the darkness of the bathroom. I knew the washing cycle had ended. I tried to open the washing machine's door to insert new washing capsule, but it was locked. I had to wait 5 minutes before the washing machine door would open. The tense silence of the apartment was becoming more and more unbearable. I could almost hear its buzzing in my ears, and it was becoming more and more pronounced. After the buttons switched off automatically, I pressed the on button. The washing machine trembled faster and faster, and the red hamster's fur, pressed against the screen on the inside, wasn't white anymore. Mom's keys jingled behind the front door. The gray of her keys was akin to the gray of the spoiled mashed potatoes on the stove.